Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This time I'm going to be recapping the kind of wild week 4 we had. I'll be going over every single game that happened this weekend, so all 16 games. We get into some bye weeks in week 5, so we'll have less games to talk about going forward. But I think we can learn a lot about week 4, a lot to take going forward. Pretty brutal week for me in my biggest buy-in league. I was up like 65 points basically up against Derrick Henry and Kenneth Walker going into the last 2 games. Felt pretty good about it, but you guys all know how that went. Obviously didn't work out for me, so I fell 2-2 in that league. Gonna be okay, but obviously a bit of a rough thing to happen there, so I'm recording this right after that, so a little bummed, but we'll be alright. But yeah, a lot of stuff to learn from here. I think it should be an exciting recap here, and then if you guys have any specific questions or anything, just let me know. I'll try and fly through this, and then also we'll get waivers coming to you today as well, so stay tuned for that one. Yeah, with that, let's just get into the first game. Kicking things off for the Thursday night game we had the Cowboys visiting the Giants. Neither one of these teams really impressed me here. The Cowboys won the game, but they lost time of possession, lost third down, less first down, just a couple big plays. The Giants couldn't never punch anything in the end zone, so just not really a fun game to watch in general. Rico Dowdle, he's the clear starter for the Cowboys at over 61% of the rush attempts. He is the running back in Dallas that you're going to want to start if there ever is one of them, but like Dowdle scored a touchdown in this game and still wasn't that great. It's tough to really see a world where we're excited to play a Cowboy running back going forward here. Other than that, Jake Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb, still the only Dallas pass catchers worth a lot. You're starting both of those guys, but I think the other guys are just going to rotate in, so it's tough to really trust anybody there. Dak did fine. You're still starting him as like a low-end QB1. Malik Neighbors, he's absolutely awesome, just phenomenal. I think he's clearly the best wide receiver in this rookie class so far. Just absolutely balling out. He's a stud. He's going to be a locked-in starter for us every single week. Did get banged up at the end of the game. Should be good to go. I think it's a concussion, but he has the 10 days to recover instead of the usual 7. It'll be a touch and go, so stay tuned for that throughout the week, but I think Neighbors will probably be good to go going forward. Devin Singletary was a huge letdown here. We thought we had a really great matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. Would have expected it to be a good game script for him, but obviously it didn't pan out. Just didn't look very good. It's going to be tough to trust Devin Singletary going forward. Has a good matchup next weekend against Seattle, I believe. So you could throw him back in the fold there, but it's obviously not something we're super excited about. And then Wan'Dale Robinson, maybe a flex play going forward in full PPR, had 11 catches in this game. Obviously, that's good for you guys in full PPR. Didn't look for particularly phenomenal, but they are relatively pass heavy in New York, which is a little surprising. And Robinson can sure get open close to the line of scrimmage, so you can use him in a pinch if you need to in PPR. Next up, we had the Bengals visiting the Panthers here. This one was a fun game. On the Bengals side of the ball, it seems more and more like Chase Brown is seemingly taking over for Zach Moss. We saw pretty close to a 50-50 timeshare there, although Chase Brown actually got the goal line work, had 2 short yardage touchdowns. Looks like he's just got more juice. It's not necessarily a knock on Zach Moss. He's looked fine, but Chase Brown's clearly the more explosive athlete. I think they're both like low-end plays going forward. Tough matchup next week against Baltimore. But Chase Brown, I think, is the guy I'd prefer to have if he's on waivers. We'll talk about him. He does need to be absolutely rostered. A guy that I do think has some upside going forward. Kind of an underwhelming game, actually, for the passing game from Cincinnati. Ja'Marr Chase saved his day with a big, huge touchdown. Looked awesome on that play. It was fun to see him break out. T. Higgins had 6 for 60 in the first half and then finished with that, so that's a little disappointing. Burrow only had the 2 passing touchdowns, like 220 passing yards. So okay, but not what you're hoping for. For the Panthers, Dalton was good again. He's really great for this passing offense in Carolina. That's obviously super exciting. Deontay was great, 13 targets, had 7 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. Could have had a much bigger game, dropped a touchdown. Not really a drop, but it was a contested pass. Had a dropped, like 40-yard play. Could have easily had a monster game. We are starting Deontay every single week going forward. Xavier Legette looked pretty good. He's a really explosive player. He made a lot of like rookie mistakes out there, but he's a talented player. Put up a good fantasy game. I think you can play him as like a flex play going forward. This Panthers offense looks pretty legit going forward. And then Chuba, he's a monster. He's just absolutely locked in. I believe he was the RB1 this week, or not the RB1, but an RB1 again this week, and RB1 of the season. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle Jonathan Brooks coming back. We could see him come back in week 5. I think it'll be a bit of a split. I think Chuba's probably going to get like 70% of the work, and Jonathan Brooks getting like 30%. We'll slowly see that ramp up over the course of the first few weeks, but really this is just going to end Miles Sanders' touches in the offense, then we'll just see a slow trickle up of Jonathan Brooks' workload going forward. So keep an eye out on that, but I think Chuba's still a guy you can probably start next week, and for at least one more week out of him. Next game here was the Saints at the Falcons. Kamara and Olave really gutted out some good games here. Olave dealing with the hamstring injury was clearly bothering him the whole game. Ended up with 8 for 87, so solid game there. Didn't get the touchdown. Was tackled at the 1-yard line on the last drive they had. So could have had a better game, but nice to see him put up a good game again, back-to-back weeks, and doing it with a bad injury there. Kamara, of course, workhorse running back, keeps getting it done, even though he got vultured by Taysom Hill twice, which obviously just sucks. Taysom Hill was like the tight end 2 on the week, despite playing like 15 taps. So kind of annoying. Taysom Hill just kind of bothers me because he doesn't really give fantasy points to the guys that we actually want. Shaheed bounced back as well, had a career high in targets and receptions. Nice to see that he's a focal point of the offense still. I think you can maybe play him again next week. He's just going to be a flex play every week, but if he's getting that much volume, he's going to be much more reliable. The Falcons, they won but looked bad. They had a muff punt touchdown and a pick six touchdown, so really didn't do a whole lot on offense. They did just enough to win. Tyler Algier was more involved than you'd like. He actually out-carried Bijan Robinson this week. Bijan did pop up on the injury report before the game, like on Friday, so that could be why. Let's not completely overreact to that. Obviously, Bijan was having some elite usage before that, so I don't want to panic there, but I just keep an eye on it. I think Algier obviously needs to be rostered. If something were to happen to Bijan, Algier would be fantastic, and Algier looked good too. He's a good player. I don't want to just knock him just because he's behind Bijan. He's a really talented player. Drake London's usage continues to underwhelm, was fine, like 6 for 62. Mooney again outgained him. Mooney has more receiving yards than Drake London on the season. That's obviously upsetting. I think London's still like a wide receiver 2 to 3, and then Darnell Mooney's a flex play going forward. And then Kyle Pitts, bad again, 0 points, just doesn't look great, can't really get open. I know tight end's a wasteland. Mark Andrews got 0 points this week. Kyle Pitts got 0. If you want to keep playing Kyle Pitts, you totally can, but you don't have to. There are options on waivers. It's just gonna be really tough. We gotta look on waivers, see if we can do things. I'll talk about stuff with the waiver wire this week, see if there's some guys we want to highlight. But it's tough. It's tough in the tight end streets right now. Next, we had the Jaguars visiting the Texans. The Jaguars had every opportunity to win this game and just didn't find a way to do it. It was nice to see both Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr. perform. Brian Thomas looks really good. I think he's a really talented player. He just needs Trevor Lawrence to play better. Christian Kirk had 12 targets, had a really good fantasy day, and could have had an even bigger one. Trevor Lawrence missed him on what should have been like a 60-yard touchdown. So Christian Kirk's a guy that I think we can flex going forward. It's good to see him get more involved. Rumors circulating about a potential trade to Kansas City going forward. There's going to be a lot of receivers linked to them going forward. But Kirk absolutely needs to be on rosters. I know in some leagues he got dropped early on in the season, but that's definitely not what should have happened. For Jacksonville, the backfield's a bit of a disaster. We saw Travis Etienne miss some of the first quarter with a shoulder injury. Tank Bigsby has kind of looked better than him so far. He's not a complete bust so far, but I think Etienne is someone we want to keep an eye on. You're still playing him every week because running back is really tough, obviously, but Tank Bigsby needs to be rostered for sure. There's obvious upside there for Tank Bigsby if something were to happen to Etienne, and it seems like he's just earning more and more touches in this offense. For the Texans, Nico's a monster. He might finish as the wide receiver 1. He's on pace for over 2,000 receiving yards. You have to start him every single week. If you want to rank him as your wide receiver 1 the rest of the season, I have no problem with that. Stephon Diggs, great as well. Had a rushing touchdown in this game. Continued to be involved. Jaguars' defense is really bad, and then with Tank Dell down, we kind of knew both those guys would have good games, but it's nice to see them come through. And then Cam Akers, kind of a letdown, had 13 carries in this game, so not necessarily a horrible workload, but didn't catch a pass, didn't score a touchdown, so only had 13 for 53. Not really going to get it done. I'm probably just going to avoid this backfield next time Joe Mixon misses a game. We saw J.J. Taylor be involved. Dario Gumbawale scored a touchdown. Just kind of too not concentrated enough for me to trust any of those guys going forward if Mixon misses a game. So I'm not playing the backfield to Houston unless Joe Mixon's there. Next, we had the Broncos at the Jets. This was by far the grossest game of the week, just not a fun game to watch. Cortland Sutton had 60 receiving yards. Bo Nix had 60 passing yards. At one point, Sutton had 60 of the Broncos' 53 passing yards. That's kind of a funny stat. I believe Bo Nix had -7 passing yards at halftime. So just wild. The Broncos ended up winning this game. Javonte Williams actually did show us a little bit of life here. Does have a 10+% target share in 3 straight weeks. Did have a good run, had like 19 carries for 70-something yards, looked good enough. If you need to play him next week, you kind of could get away with it. It's a plus matchup for them. We saw Tyler Bidet have a bit of a scare on the sideline. It sounds like he's okay, but he did go down, had to fly home without the team. They took him to the hospital. Again, it sounds like he's okay. That's great to hear, but when that kind of thing happens, I'd be shocked to see him play next week. Audric Estime is going to be out one more week, so it's probably just Javonte and then Jaleel McLaughlin next week. I think if you need to in a pinch, you could potentially start Javonte in week 5. The Jets, absolutely brutal on offense, threw the ball 42 times, just didn't get anything going there. Breece Hall was just absolute dud here, kind of splitting touches with Braylon Allen. Didn't get a lot done through the air, didn't score a touchdown, they just couldn't move the ball at all. You're still starting him every single week, obviously, but you hate to see this floor. It's just brutal when you know the floor is this low for a guy that you drafted, obviously, in the first round. Garrett Wilson continues to show that he's just not that dude to me. Had like 4 for 42. It's fine, he's getting targets, but he's just not guys that are elite on that level, I think about Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors shows up despite quarterback play, despite matchup. He's just getting it done every single week. And Garrett Wilson just hasn't done that through 3 years now in his career. Garrett Wilson, to me, is more of like a top 20 wide receiver at best. And even then, he's never even done that in his career. I think you really do need to sell high on Garrett Wilson if you still can. I talked about him as a sell high last week. The schedule's not getting any easier going forward. I kind of think if you can get out of Garrett Wilson, it's just a good time to do it because I just don't see the ceiling there in this offense. Next up, we had the Vikings at the Packers. A fun game in this one. Sam Darnold continues to look legit. Despite the score at the end of the game, the Vikings ended up actually just absolutely slaughtering the Packers. They were up 28-7 at halftime. It was nice to see Jordan Addison come back and ball out. Scored twice. That was great to see. Jordan Love ended up great for fantasy, but this was not a good game for Green Bay. He had 3 interceptions to sort of put them down early, and they just had to air it out, and it worked over the second half of the season. Ended up basically resulting in every single player having a good game. Jaden Reed was fantastic. Dontavian Wicks had 13 targets in this game. Only caught 5 of them, but 2 touchdowns. I love the upside here for Dontavian Wicks going forward. He's a guy that's going to be a must-have when we talk about waivers. Romeo Doubs was involved enough, didn't do a lot for fantasy, but he's someone we can keep an eye on. Tucker Kraft was great again, or this week. Nice to see him get more involved. Sounds like Christian Watson is going to miss at least some time with an ankle injury. They're contemplating IR, so Tucker Kraft, Dontavian Wicks are both going to be really popular waiver ads for me this week. And then Josh Jacobs, the only note I'll make, split carries again with Emmanuel Wilson. I'm a little bit concerned about it because this was a game they needed to use him in. Jacobs just hasn't looked super efficient. Emmanuel Wilson looks pretty good. Obviously, Marshawn Lloyd's going to come back at some point. You wanted Josh Jacobs to be like effectively a workhorse running back in a really good offense. The touchdowns haven't come yet for Josh Jacobs. So that's obviously deflating his numbers a little bit. So I wouldn't necessarily panic, but I do think that the upside of Josh Jacobs being like a top 5 running back, that's just gone for me. You're hoping he can just sort of be on a good offense and efficiency his way to being a fringe top 12 guy, but that's going to be tough for him. I think he's slotting like right into that 12 to 15 range for me the rest of the way here. Next up, we had the Steelers at the Colts. The score looked a lot closer than this game was. Ended up being a 3-point game, but the Colts kind of dominated this whole game, really, other than like a last-minute just push by the Steelers here. Got shut down the majority of the game. It was like 17-3 at halftime, 17-0 right before a last-second field goal there. So not really super excited about the Steelers. It was great to see George Pickens perform really well, 7 for 113. He's a guy that we can definitely start going forward. I mean, you're going to keep starting him every single week, but it's kind of upsetting just to know, like, the passing touchdown upside's not really there in this offense. They're going to be a low-volume offense in general, and it took this kind of game environment for Pickens to really put up finally his first good game of the season, and this is not a game environment I expect the Colts in very often. Their defense is still legit. One bad week doesn't change that. So I wouldn't expect the Steelers to be down like 3 scores very often this season. They're going to play a lot of close games, and they're going to try to run the ball a lot when they do that. So I would potentially look to sell high on George Pickens. I don't know if you really can because he obviously still hasn't had a great game, but I think he was a really popular buy low going into this week and then ended up having a good game this week. So it's possible that you can sort of extract some value there because I just don't really know what the ceiling is there in this offense. Just low volume, low passing upside here. Just not something I'm super excited about, so you could kick the tires on that. For the Colts, Anthony Richardson got banged up, and of course the passing offense improved. We saw Joe Flacco come in, and then both Josh Downs and Michael Pittman put up their best games of the season. If you're a pass catcher or an owner of any of these pass catchers in fantasy, you're kind of hoping that we see Anthony Richardson miss some time because Joe Flacco, we saw last season with Cleveland, he is actually a really big boost to all the pass catchers. So we'll see what happens there. Sounds like it's a hit pointer for Richardson, so it's going to be more of a pain tolerance thing going forward. So I bet Richardson maybe misses one game. I wouldn't expect a lot there, but I'm not playing Richardson next week, just knowing that he could leave early. I need to see him play a full game healthy, and then I still don't really want to play any of the pass catchers unless we see Joe Flacco. Jonathan Taylor, he's fantastic. We did see him suffer a high ankle sprain. They're calling it a mild high ankle sprain. Always weird because normally high ankle sprains are like a 3-week injury, so we'll see what happens there. Trey Sermon will be a popular waiver ad, but hopefully we get more information tomorrow before you guys actually have to make those waiver claims. Then Justin Fields was awesome for fantasy. Had over 300 passing yards, scored 3 total touchdowns, 50 rushing yards. He's a solid streaming option if you need him going forward. They've got a matchup against the Cowboys next week that isn't necessarily scary with both Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence out, so there's some upside there for Fields. That's obviously as long as he remains the starter here. It's technically still possible we see Russ coming in as the starter in Week 5. I don't know if that's going to happen. I still kind of expect to see Justin Fields again, but we'll just see what happens there. I do think that as long as Fields is the starter, you can stream him. But also, if Russ comes back and he's like a healthy backup, it makes things a little bit scarier because, let's say Russ was healthy this week and Fields started the game going, just looking awful when they were down 17-3. You could have seen them pull Fields and put Russ in, and knowing that kind of floor is in there, it's a little bit scary with Fields, but he's a streaming option if you need him going forward. Next, we had the Rams at the Bears. Kyron got it done for the Rams, but really nobody else did. We saw Jordan Whittington get a little bit involved. I believe he went 6 for 62. That's good to see. Sounds like Puka's going to miss week 5 again. Makes a lot of sense. The Rams have a week 6 bye, so I bet we see Cup come back in week 7. Not so sure about Puka. It'll probably be a little bit longer for Puka, but I don't think I really want to play anybody but Kyron until that happens. Other than that, though, for the Bears won, but they really didn't need to do a lot outside of DeAndre Swift. Had an absolutely awesome game. Had like 90-plus rushing yards and a touchdown, 7 for 72 through the air. Of course, it happened the week where everyone finally benched him, so that kind of sucks. He does play the Colts next week, I believe, so good matchup there for, or not the Colts next week. I'm blanking out. I know it was a really good matchup, but it's not the Colts. They played the Colts in week 3. Regardless, I know it's a good matchup for Swift in week 5, so I think a lot of people are probably going to want to start him. Oh, it's the Panthers. Yeah, they play the Panthers in week 5. Great matchup. I think you're playing him as like a low-end RB2 next week, but the floor really is scary. We saw Roschon get the goal line work, so that kind of sucks. But, it's nice to see the ceiling for DeAndre Swift. So he's a guy you can play if you need to. And then just not sure I really feel confident starting any Bears pass catchers going forward. Keenan Allen was back this week. Not a lot of passing volume to go around. They had 80 receiving yards between everybody outside of DeAndre Swift. DJ Moore bailed you out with a touchdown, but Roma Dunze was bad. Cole Kmet was uninvolved relatively. Keenan Allen, and it's just there's too many mouths to feed and not a very big pie here. So I really don't think I want to play any Bears going forward. DJ Moore's like a low-end wide receiver 3. DeAndre Swift, low-end RB2. Cole Kmet's a desperation streamer, and I'm probably benching both Keenan and Rome going forward. Next up, we have the Eagles at the Bucks. The Eagles need the Week 5 bye really badly here. Jalen Hurts, Saquon, and Goddard, they were fine, but not what you want to see. Hurts kind of, did fine. He scored twice, had like 160 passing yards, just not great. Saquon had the one long run, a couple receptions to make his game okay, like 13.6 PPR fantasy points. Goddard got to get done again. Just tight end sucks. He went like 7 for 62, so that's totally fine. But, just the upside in this offense is clearly limited without Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown. I bet they get them both back in week 6. So that's great. You got to weather one more week without the Eagles helping you. But after that, I think they should be back to full strength. So don't panic with the Eagles if you're in a situation where you want to look to buy low on them. Like I know a lot of people that have A.J. Brown. I've got A.J. Brown in a lot of leagues. I'm 2-2 in those leagues, and I feel kind of lucky to be there. If you've got if the owner of A.J. Brown in your league's down to like 1-3, 0-4, it might be a good opportunity to kick the tires on buying low on those guys because everybody's got a bye week at some point. Eat the bye week now, get the discount while you can because I'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward with some trade targets, but it's a pretty decent strategy if you're in a good spot to eat bye weeks for teams that really can't afford to lose. If a team's 0-4, they're going to feel like this is a must-win game. Anybody they have on bye, that's going to be a pretty available player just because they don't want to drop to 0-5. So, if the Saquon manager, if the Hurts manager, if the A.J. Brown manager in your league has an 0-4 record, they're certainly available for trade. So just kick the tires on that. For the Bucks looked awesome. Obviously, Baker Mayfield's playing fantastic. Mike Evans balled out. Bucky and Rachaad White were both fine. Both went 10 for 49. Rachaad White caught a few passes. Bucky Irving scored the touchdown. A little bit concerning. It's tough to take a whole lot from this because both of them were coming into this game questionable. Hamstring injury for Bucky Irving, Rachaad White coming into the game with a food illness here. So not a lot to really take away from that, but the one thing I'll highlight is that Bucky did get the goal line work. We saw Rachaad White fail to punch it in week 3, so that's a little bit scary. That's a big loss, actually, for Rachaad White if that's something they're going to stick with. And Bucky Irving looks good. So I view Rachaad White as more of like a low-end RB2. It's tough to necessarily even say that Rachaad White's the guy you want to start over Bucky Irving. So both of them need to be rostered for sure. I think they're both like low-end RB2 plays, but nothing that I'm super excited about going forward because they're just going to be splitting. Chris Godwin was fine, didn't score a touchdown, but did his job like 6 for 60. And then Baker was fantastic, a guy that we can honestly probably stream going forward. He's been a top 10 quarterback 3 of 4 weeks. So just something to keep an eye on. They've got a fun matchup in Thursday Night Football this week against the Falcons. Always scary playing guys in Thursday Night Football. I kind of hate doing it. It just feels like it never works out. But I don't really have a whole lot of reasoning behind that. It's just, historically speaking, you see a little bit of a grosser game on Thursday, and it just sucks starting off your week down because of a bad play. But Baker's a guy you could stream if you need to. If you've got Hurts, I don't mind pivoting there this week. Next, we got the Patriots at the Niners. We'll make this one pretty quick. The key takeaway for me here is that Ramondre might have sort of lost the job here by fumbling early on in the game. He did end up coming back in the game, still led the team in touches at the running back position, but he did miss a drive or two. Antonio Gibson had another really big play. He looks pretty good. Tough to really say they'll switch to Antonio Gibson off of Ramondre because I know it hasn't been a problem this season, but Antonio Gibson's biggest hamstring or just the biggest thing that's hamstrung Antonio Gibson's career so far is just the fact that he can't hold on to the ball. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to pivot away from a guy that's fumbling to a guy that's historically had a fumbling problem. But Just not a lot to do there. I think that Ramondre is still a guy who can play as like a low-end RB2. Antonio Gibson needs to be rostered because if something were to happen there, if they did bench Ramondre, Gibson's a talented enough player. They'll dump the ball down to him enough. He's a good pass catcher. You could certainly start him. But I don't want to play any other Patriot really going forward. None of the receivers are separating. You're just playing with fire, playing one of the tight ends. The quarterback position's obviously bad there. It's Ramondre Stevenson, and that's it basically for the Patriots. The Niners looked great. Just keep playing the usuals. Kittle got it done. Jordan Mason's a monster. Brandon Ayuk disappointed again, so that's a little bit concerning here. We're going on 4 weeks of Brandon Ayuk not being good. Debo didn't have a huge game here, but it's just tough. It was his first game back off an injury. Think he'll be fine. Jawan Jennings was fine, had a couple big plays. Felt involved enough as a guy that you could like flex as a low-end option going forward, but it's tough because there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. I think you can play all of these guys going forward, but obviously Jawan Jennings, super low-end option. Ayuk like a low-end wide receiver 3 for me, and then Debo's a low-end wide receiver 2. Kittle's obviously a must-start at tight end. Oh, and Purdy's obviously he's playing great. He's a really high-end streaming option. Next, we had the Commanders at the Cardinals. The Commanders, they balled out here. They might just have their franchise quarterback in Jaden Daniels. I believe he's scored on more drives this season than he's thrown in completions, so that's absolutely phenomenal. Jaden Daniels is playing fantastic. He's a guy that's going to be potentially a franchise quarterback for the Commanders going forward. Terry McLaurin had a great game again. That's awesome to see. It was really getting scary if you own Terry for the first 2 weeks of the season, but it's great to see this Commanders offense sort of getting things rolling there. Backfield super valuable in Washington. Brian Robinson keeps getting it done. We saw Jeremy McNichols score twice, so I doubt any of you played him, but I think it makes you a little bit more optimistic about Austin Eckler when he comes back. Brian Robinson, you're playing him every single week going forward. Arizona, they struggled. That kind of sucked because we really did expect a shootout here, and the Commanders held up their end of the bargain. You would have expected the Cardinals to sort of keep pace there, but they struggled after starting out hot. James Conner, he's locked in as a starter. He's a stud, had 18 carries for 104 yards. You're playing him every single week. He looks really good. Marvin Harrison Jr. at least scored on the first drive of the game, but he had like 4 targets in the first quarter and didn't get another target till like late in the third. So that obviously sucked. I don't know what's going on with the Cardinals offense. It felt like they didn't have much of a game plan outside of that opening drive. Kyler, he needs to play better. I think you're still starting him every single week, but 3 rushing yards is not going to get it done for what you're drafted Kyler to be. You need him to be better going forward. I think you're still starting him every single week because I think he's still a really talented player. He's got a ton of upside and he's got the weapons to do it. And hopefully he gets Trey McBride back next week as well. So you're still playing him, but just sucks to see this kind of floor against what should have been one of the best matchups of the week. Next up, we have the Chiefs at the Chargers. The biggest story here is going to be Rice likely tearing his ACL. We don't have official word on that, but it's all but official at this point. Rashee Rice is likely going to miss the remainder of 2024. Going to be a huge hit for the Chiefs offense going forward. Travis Kelce, he gets a huge bump here. We saw him finally have his first good game of the year. He's just much more necessary to the offense without Rashee Rice there. Kareem Hunt, probably the RB we want to own in Kansas City. We saw him get the majority of the work. Carson Steele fumbled again, so 2 fumbles for Carson Steele early on in the season probably just cost him the job. I'd be shocked to see Carson Steele get a lot of work anymore the rest of the year. Kareem Hunt looked pretty good as well, which is nice to see. Obviously, if he's available on waivers, he's going to be a really popular ad. Samaje Perine, just not a guy I'm super excited about. Did score a touchdown, but you're not really playing him any week going forward. I think the Chiefs are going to be a likely candidate to trade for a receiver at some point. I've seen Amari Cooper's name floated around, Christian Kirk, DeAndre Hopkins. I'd be shocked if the Chiefs enter the playoffs with this current wide receiver room because they're not going to get Hollywood or Rashee Rice back at any point. They're going to need to add somebody because we've seen Sky Moore, we've seen Justin Watson, we've seen these guys. None of those guys are going to step up. They need help outside of that. Justin Herbert tried his best, but the Chargers just need to rest up. They didn't have anybody really healthy on the offensive line. Herbert himself wasn't very mobile. It does seem like Ladd McConkey's the wide receiver 1 there. Looked really good. Had a really nice play on a touchdown catch. The volume's just not there for the Chargers offense, though. You need them to be trailing in games. You need to see Justin Herbert be healthy for Ladd to be a guy that I want to trust. But I think if you're going to play a Chargers wide receiver going forward, it's going to be with Ladd McConkey. J.K. Dobbins, still the RB1 there, but again, really tough matchup. We've seen 2 straight tough ones for Dobbins, and he didn't outperform either one of them. He is getting the majority of the work there. They're throwing the ball to him enough. He had a really big opportunity late in the game where we had Herbert rolling left, threw a just absolute seam to J.K. Dobbins and just didn't quite come down with it. He could have caught it and kept running. Could have been a massive play for Dobbins. So the opportunities are there for Dobbins. I think you're still playing him as like a low-end RB2 after this week, but not a guy that I would expect a whole lot of upside from going forward. And obviously, it's pretty boom or bust with Dobbins. You need that big play for him to pay off because it does seem like they will just keep getting Gus Edwards involved in short yardage, even though he sucks. Next up, we got the Browns at the Raiders. The Browns, they struggled in general. That's a shocker, obviously. Just getting there, they've been absolutely brutal to watch. Scored a touchdown on the opening drive this week and then just didn't do much the entire rest of the game. So that sucks. Amari Cooper had a down week here, ended up with like 7 PPR fantasy points, but he could have had a much bigger game. Dropped what should have been like a 30-yard pass, ended up turning into an interception, so that sucked if you're a Browns fan. And then he had an 80-yard touchdown called back by the fakest holding call I've ever seen. It was a late call. I watched the play a couple times because I've got Amari Cooper in a couple leagues. Didn't see anything there, so that sucked. Amari Cooper should have had a big game actually, but that got called back. Obviously made his week a whole lot worse. So not worried about Amari Cooper. We saw him be really great in week 3. Still seems to be the clear focal point of the offense, but him dropping passes is a little weird. He leads the NFL in drops, I believe, to this point this season, so that is a little bit concerning, but he's still getting open. He's still earning targets. I would just keep playing Amari Cooper every single week. I'll highlight Jerry Jeudy as well. Looked pretty good this week. Wasn't great for fantasy, but was involved enough that you could use him in a flex situation. And then David Njoku should be back at some point, potentially as soon as next week. With how bad the tight end position is, I think David Njoku is just going to go right back into people's lineups, and we're just going to hope things look better for him. For the Raiders, Zamir White fumbled. He's just worthless. I don't know if you can drop him because he's potentially the lead running back on a team, but Alexander Madison looks way better. We saw them involving a third running back this week. Zamir White's just not a good player. Fumbled and could have potentially cost him the game with it. I can't trust Zamir White in my lineup at all. He's a guy that, I mean, you can't trade anything for him either, but I don't know what you're holding him for on your roster either, because like if you have him on your roster, you're going to consider playing him on a bye week or something, and he's just going to give you like 3 points. So if you want to drop him, I don't hate it. It's just obviously it sucks because you drafted him to be probably your RB2 or 3. Outside of that, for the Raiders, I think Trey Tucker is probably the wide receiver we want behind Devontae Adams. Just looks really good. He was a third-round draft pick last year, flashed a little bit, has looked good so far this season. Looks explosive with the ball in his hands. I think Trey Tucker needs to be picked up in some leagues and be a guy that you can flex if Devontae Adams misses more time. Next up, we had the Bills at the Ravens. This one was the start of my demise in my biggest money league here. The Bills just laid an egg here. Curtis Samuel was on the field a lot, and it sort of seemed like James Cook wasn't on the field as much as you would expect. Not really concerned there, but I just don't really know what the Bills were doing. It seems weird to take James Cook off the field so you can have Curtis Samuel on it. James Cook's one of their best offensive players. I just don't think they came into this game with a very good game plan. Khalil Shakir, probably the wide receiver 1. We saw him get banged up a little bit. I wouldn't really be worried about it, but none of the offensive players really did a whole lot. We saw Kincaid do enough. Keon Coleman had a big drop, but then had a couple other big plays. So we'll see what happens there. I still think it's Shakir and then really nobody else as the wide receiver room goes for Buffalo. Josh Allen, Dalton Kincaid, James Cook, they're going to be fine. Don't panic. You can keep playing those guys, but it obviously is a little bit concerning just knowing that this is the floor. But road game on a short week against the Ravens, don't overreact about that. That's going to be totally fine. For the Ravens, Derrick Henry, he's going to be a monster in games the Ravens win. Like I said, I had a league where I was up like 65 basically against Derrick Henry and Kenneth Walker at the end here. This was the start of it. Derrick Henry went out with like 200 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, caught 3 passes, was like the second leading receiver in terms of receptions for the Ravens as well, which is insane. I just don't know what to say about Derrick Henry. He's a monster. You're going to play him every single week, and the Ravens seem like they got things rolling here with this offense. And I don't think the Ravens really want to throw the ball anymore. They had 5 completions to non-running backs this last week. Makes it really difficult to trust guys like Zay Flowers, trust guys like Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely. I don't know what to say about it. I think you're probably playing Lamar. You're playing Derrick Henry every single week. Justice Hill is like a low-end option. He's involved enough that you can start him in PPR. And then, like Zay Flowers, he's a low-end PPR option. But it's tough because like next week they play Cincinnati, who's not been good at all on defense. We're going to see the Ravens probably just do the same thing they've done each of the last 2 weeks, run the ball a ton. And when that's happening, like why would they do anything else? It's what they want to do. If you're getting 6 yards per carry, just chunk plays after chunk plays, just leaning on people, it makes a lot of sense to keep running the ball, and it's going to make it really tough to trust any Ravens pass catchers. It's going to be tempting to start them all again next week, both Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews against Cincinnati, but I really don't know. Any player you play on this offense that's not Lamar or Derrick Henry, just know that the floor is literally 0 points. So that's baked in. I would look for other options. I've got Zach Ertz and Mark Andrews in the league. I'm probably going to start playing Zach Ertz going forward, and it feels bad, but I think it's time to just bite the bullet. You spend a high draft pick on Mark Andrews, and I wouldn't just cut him because he's still Mark Andrews. I'd give it a couple more weeks to see if things play out, but you don't have to start him every week. You can just wait and see if things get better before you trust him in your lineup. Moving on to Monday Night Football here, we had the Titans at the Dolphins. The Dolphins, they're a disaster. I really don't mind sitting every single Dolphin until Tua comes back. There were a couple opportunities for Tyreek Hill to have a big play. We saw Huntley underthrow him once and then overthrow him once. So Tyreek could have had a big game here, but you need one of those to come through for Tyreek to be valuable because they can just really just press up on the line of scrimmage here. They're not worried about Tyler Huntley. They're not worried about Skylar Thompson, Tim Boyle. None of those guys are going to do enough in this offense to really support Waddle or Tyreek Hill, so it's just really tough. Devon Achane, a guy you can play. The running back position is brutal here, but it sucks because without any threat over the top, there's just not very much room underneath. Huntley as a mobile quarterback just reduces the checkdowns to Devon Achane as well, so you don't even get that in this offense. As far as fantasy goes, I think Tyler Huntley starting is basically the worst thing we can see for Miami. They play the Patriots next week. Should be a win for them potentially, so I still think you can play Devon Achane next week, but we really need that bye for Tua. I think they got the bye in week 6. If we get the bye there, maybe we get Tua back in week 7. That's the earliest I could see it happening, because that would be his I guess that'd be him only missing 3 games. He's probably gonna have to miss week 7, then come back in week 8 at the earliest. So that's really what you're hoping at this point. It sucks though. I get it that it's just a really tough situation. If you've got Achane, I wouldn't trade him away. If you're 3-1, 4-0, I'd consider trading for Achane or even Tyreek because the upside is there when Tua does come back, and I am of the mindset that Tua will come back at some point in the season. So there's risk there. You got to play the odds there, but I think it's gonna be ugly until we get Tua back here. For the Titans, Tony Pollard had a nice game, ended up with over 100 total yards, scored a touchdown, kind of a fake touchdown. It was a touchdown like the last play of the game. They didn't need to score it. It was just a 4th down. They didn't kick the field goal line because they didn't want to risk it getting blocked. But fantasy points don't care. They're on your books there, so Pollard at least had a nice game from a fantasy standpoint. Probably the only Titan I'm looking to start going forward, though, because Calvin Ridley just doesn't look involved enough. This offense is not supporting very many pass catchers. DeAndre Hopkins is too involved to really support much there. They've got a bye in week 5. They get Indianapolis in week 6, which is good. Buffalo and Detroit are some scary matchups there, though. So I don't know. I think Pollard's fine. He's a low-end RB2, but I just wouldn't expect a whole lot out of anybody in this offense for Tennessee going forward. And then finally, we had the last game this week. Really got all we could have really wanted out of this game from a fantasy standpoint. Other than me, obviously, didn't enjoy watching Kenneth Walker just absolutely beat me down. I thought I was going to be fine, but obviously 3 touchdowns and just an absolutely monster performance for Kenneth Walker is going to do a lot to hurt your chances of winning when you're playing against him. Sorry, still hurting from that one. But really got all we could have wanted out of this game here. DK, he was fine for Seattle, but in general, it sort of felt like the Seahawks receivers kind of let us down in a game that had 71 total points. We didn't have any receiving touchdowns from the big 3 receivers here. The lone passing touchdown by Geno went to a rookie tight end that obviously nobody played either, so that's kind of a bit of a bummer, but enough yardage that it was totally okay. We saw Geno throw for almost 400 yards in this game, so it was fine. DK broke 100 yards, 7 for like 102 and a fumble, so 15 PPR fantasy points, like 11 and a half and in half PPR, so totally fine. But obviously, you would have hoped for a bigger day. DK got tackled at the 1, could have been a much bigger game for him. But I think it's going to be fine for Seattle. You're playing DK every single week. This offense looks really good, and they get a nice matchup next week again against New York. Kenneth Walker certainly won people their games this week, or if you're me, he lost you your week. But just start him every single week. He's a stud. I mentioned that I was worried about playing him this week. I still said to start him, but just tough matchup against Detroit, and at this point, there's just no tough matchup for Kenneth Walker. He's one of the most talented running backs in the NFL, and the only scary part is just whether or not he can stay healthy through a game. For the Lions, just start all of them. They scored 42 points in this game. They're absolutely phenomenal on offense. David Montgomery scored a touchdown in 7 straight games. Jahmyr Gibbs scored twice in this one, I believe. Just absolutely phenomenal, both these guys. Jameson Williams had a 70-yard touchdown. It's great to see that upside there. Sort of back to his usual role, though. Wasn't as involved in the offense. It's a little bit concerning if you want to consider selling high on Jameson Williams. I don't hate that because the Lions aren't going to score 42 points every week, and 2 receptions doesn't really get it done for Jameson. So he's a low-end, he's a flex play, boomer bust kind of guy for me, and if he's someone that people are a little bit more excited about, I'd be willing to move him. And then Amon-Ra got it done again. Not super involved, which is a little concerning, but he threw a touchdown, did enough. I'm not worried about Amon-Ra. It's just he didn't get peppered with targets and didn't have a ton of yardage like you would expect out of Amon-Ra. And then Laporta, a little underwhelming again, had a couple big plays. So, as far as tight ends go, you're playing Laporta every single week, but kind of sucks seeing the upside there. Just doesn't really seem to be there. I don't think he scored a touchdown yet this season, so hopefully that changes for him. Had a couple opportunities to do it this week, so I think it'll be fine for Laporta. It just sucks for the whole tight end position. You're playing Laporta every single week, but all of these guys are letting us down week after week right now. So that'll do it for the week 4 recap here. Hopefully you guys found it useful. If there's anything I left out, anything else you have questions about, let me know in the comments below. I love interacting with you guys there. Just a reminder, I know it's brutal. I'm feeling some pain after this week as well. I'm basically 2-2 in all the leagues I care about. So not great, not bad, but we're doing fine here. Just understand that no matter where you are, if you're 0-4, 4-0, it's a long season. There's going to be a lot of stuff, a lot of ups and downs. Weird things happen every single week. You just got to balance things out. It's going to be okay. Keep grinding. Your team's going to get better every single week if you just keep making the right things, making the right moves. Just stay active. Everything's going to be okay. Don't overreact. Don't tilt and trade away a player that costs you your week. Stay level-headed. We got a long season ahead of us. No matter where you're at right now, there's a lot of things that are going to change, and there's a lot that we can do to make sure we get better. One way you can get better is just by making sure that you keep watching all this content. There's going to keep being like 5 to 6 videos every single week that you guys can watch for free. Just make sure you subscribe to the channel, that way you don't miss any of that content. I'll be here all year long to hopefully win some championships together. If you made it this far in the video, also give it a thumbs up as well. It just helps me out quite a bit. Helps me know that I'm doing a good job and all that. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys. Stay tuned for the waiver video. That'll be up today as well, so I highly recommend you go watch that. Let's make some waiver moves to get our team set for week 5. Thanks, guys. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.